Well, this is part two, and with Pastor Eric, and man, we had a great conversation in part one about what it's like to be a godly man. But now we want to kind of shift focus a little and talk about what we can do as guys to, well, first, how do we relate to the opposite sex? At the same time, how do we prepare, to lead our future wife and kids and family in general at the same time as doing ministry? So, how did you do it, Pastor Eric? Did you do anything to prepare for marriage, or what would you say to that?
Yeah, as a young man, starting to think ahead to how do I want to be when I'm married, and how do I begin to practice that while I'm single? Is kind of a tough thing. You got to have kind of a good imagination and think ahead. But it was, I think if you want to act like you're married when you're married, act like you're married when you're single, because it's all about preparation. It's like eternity. Everything that we're doing right now, if it doesn't lead us to prepare, and it's not preparing us for eternity, then it's not a good thing. Just like so many of the struggles that we find,
absolutely,
that we were referring to in the last one. But I would say become a man of revelation. So learn to have a relationship with God so that you can hear Him and direct Him, because that's how you're going to have to be able to identify who it is that God is joining you together with in terms of that young woman that God has for you. You've got to be able to know by revelation, not by what she looks like physically necessarily. Those are important things. It's not like we don't have eyes in our head. We do. Beauty is one thing, but if you look at places like Genesis 24, Abraham, what did he do? He didn't send Isaac to go look for the girl. He sent his chief servant who he could trust, because he was going to look through different eyes than Isaac would have. Because she was beautiful, and the servant acknowledges that, but she was a woman of character, because she came out and she's like, "Hey, can I water your camels? Or can I get you some water?" And then he says, and then he recognized, wow, this girl goes the extra mile. I mean, she's a real true servant's heart. She's been that she must come from a great family. You know what I mean? These are the different filters that he sought to discover who the one was. He's really looking for it. But the first question he asks is, who is she, and how will I know? And he goes, Lord, would you grant me? And so he begins by prayer. So again, who's in your corner? You got the chief servant, you got your parents, you got different ones in your corner, you got godly friends that you're pursuing the Lord with. These are, important people, but it's got to start with revelation. You've got to know, because you're gonna face struggles, right? You're gonna have those questions later on when you do get married. Did I make a mistake? Did I
make the right thing?
Did I marry the wrong one? No, you got to be able to go back and stand on that faith of no, God said. God is the one who brought this person into my life.
It's interesting if you look at the contrast between Samson and Isaac, for example, right? Like they obviously didn't live in the same time, but one of them, didn't listen to his parents, like Samson, like, just give me that woman, like, because I like her, she's pleasing to my eyes, right? And then here you have someone that involved, his father, in this whole process of finding someone. I think, a lot of times when we fall in love, or we actually, I don't even know if I want to use that term, but like, when we love somebody, like, we're blindsided by it, right? Like, and by that person. And a lot of times we tend to lie to ourselves a lot and say, well, they're godly and they're this. But when you have someone that doesn't have that emotional attachment, they can look and say, who are you telling? like, I don't think they're godly, right? Like, I don't think, and I think this is so important where you involve, I think for me as a pastor, a lot of times I get extremely defensive, and I think when you have people in your congregation that respect you as a pastor, but they start dating without even telling you. And I'm like, well, you should probably have someone that is not, involved in this whole relationship, right? To tell you, is this person godly or not? And I see the results of that all the time, where they get into a relationship that is not godly because they never sought, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a specific pastor, but it could be a godly counsel, maybe a mentor that is godly, that can look at that and say, but when we try to do decisions on our own, it leads to destruction, So that's
it's not like
important.
people need permission
Yeah.
from a pastor,
Right.
But we would be wise to have a multitude of counselors, around us. And it's not like we're telling dirt on other people, but we do know, we tend to know about things going on in people's lives and struggles, and we could just, be able to say, hey, you know what? I think she's great, but not yet.
Yeah.
Or, she's great, but you're not ready, dude. You've got, and here's the things
need to step
that,
on her level.
Yeah, totally. Like you need to get your, I remember my dad telling me, you're seriously interested in Lisa?
Yeah.
You better get your track shoes on, boy, because that girl is looking to run. She's following God, and going after it. And I like, Russell and I, we like to tell people is like, pursue God with everything within you, and then look to the left or to the right,
who's doing the same thing.
See who's doing the same thing, who's going after it,
and then run together.
Yeah,
I love that. Now, so once you step into marriage, I think one of, because I'm single, but I've seen, people that are already married.
Which we need to spend a whole nother session on that about you.
We've been talking about this for a while now, and
sorry, I got you. What was the question?
The question was, how do I get married? No, I'm joking. Once you step into marriage, I think a lot of times people feel like that's gonna fix their problems, but I think that just sort of brings up to the surface what you have been kind of kicking down, and so I've talked to guys that are married, and they struggle with their insecurity, and they feel like they cannot provide for their family, and they feel like they're not good enough, and I think there's always that kind of like, how do they balance between leading their family, but at the same time they still have a lot of things that they're working through. So in your own experience, what would be your advice to someone that maybe is married, stepped into marriage, but they didn't do it, like they were not ready for it, and now they're dealing with a lot of insecurity, they're dealing with a lot of hurt, because they feel like they're not really hurt. So what would you say to someone that is going through that right now?
Well, yeah, I think there's people who got into marriage prematurely, or there's those who there's no amount of time that would have prepared them because they weren't willing to take certain steps to deal with the certain issues, like getting people in your corner, accountability, dealing with their lack of integrity in their life. They're not carrying responsibility. And so because they didn't involve other people, now they got into, something they're not equipped to handle. And so you bring all this baggage. We all bring baggage into our marriage. And so the things that we struggle with, we have to go back and do some demo work a lot of times, and tear rebuild some stuff down and then rebuild. I mean, you were raised in your family, I was raised in mine, Edward was raised in his. Shout out.
Behind the camera.
That's right, behind the camera. So we have to face all of those things. I know what I grew up in. But just because my parents didn't necessarily do everything right, I'm not going to do everything right. So we're looking to God's word, obviously, as the standard. That is the manual for marriage. It's the standard for single men, single women, how we live life. I don't know if I'm answering the question. Did I?
No, I think you are. And my whole question was, okay, if you already got into it, how do you sort of handle that situation? And the next part of this question would be, okay, now how do you take steps to lead your wife? And what does it mean to have authority as a husband, right? What does it mean to have authority? What does it mean to lead your... I know it's quite a lot to explain, but I guess practically, how do you do that? How do you say, hey, I think a lot of men, we like to have people under our authority, but we're not willing to be under authority, right? So a lot of guys that I hear, they walk around screaming that well, she's not listening to me, but they're not submitted under Christ's authority. So how do you balance that? How do you balance between, okay, your needs and at the same time leading your family and, being under authority? What does that look like for you?
I think that at some point it'd be really good if you had Lisa on the on here.
And definitely will, actually.
I mean, she meets with so many women, wives, and I think one of the biggest things that I continually hear is, guys, again, we grew up in the environment that we did, so we learned from our parents how we did it. We caught something. They didn't sit down and teach us, hey, when your wife is, getting upset and frustrated and being emotional, whatever, and I'm teaching you to shut her down. No, we saw that being demonstrated. We saw a dominance or a control, within that context. We were having this discussion just recently, because obviously we're 20 years married now, and we've had a lot of time to practice this, and it hasn't always been good, and some of it's been really challenging, because you have to learn those skills. They don't come batteries included. So Ephesians 5 really lays out, husbands, you have to learn to act like Christ. You have to relate to your wife the way that Christ relates to his. Talking to single guys, you have to learn how to approach forming relationships the way that Christ forms relationships with his bride. So what are all those different things? Well, Ephesians 5 lays it out. He starts off and he says, defer to one another, submit to one another. Okay, so that's the foundation of it. So there's this equality in value before God, serving in different functions, though, within the context of the marriage. So when it comes to, then it goes into wives, submit to your husbands. I don't think that women have such a problem with that so much. It's just that they don't have a husband that is doing his part. So we like to remind our spouse of the scriptures that are directed to them. Like, hey, babe, you need to submit to me because that's what the scripture said. Well, that wasn't written to you. Forget about it. You focus on the ones that are written to you.
You shouldn't be quoting that. You should be quoting what was written to you.
You just need to look at the ones that are written to you and seek to obey those. So it says husbands are the head of the wife. And so we read that and we go, that's the head. Well, my head tells everything else in my body what to do. But I think John Stott, if you're familiar with him, anyway, he takes that word head, looks at the three Greek words that are a possibility for that, and the third one I think is the one that he notes is the most likely, which means responsible. So she is your responsibility to care for her. Well, that fits with relate to her the same way that Christ does. And so if Lisa and I have an issue where we conflict, where we don't agree on something, so what we're going to do is we're going to pray longer and we're going to wait longer. I don't make just some dominating, controlling decision. Then if we come to a point where we're out of time, we have to make a decision. Hopefully, because of my care and building trust and all that giving, and it says, husbands, give up your life or lay down your life for your wife. If I've been doing my job, then I think her job of being able to say, you know what, I can trust him, because the scriptures talk to a wife about, as unto the Lord do these things in the way you relate. So then hopefully she can be at a place where she can say, okay, I'm going to go with you on this one.
Yeah, I probably will have to ask Pastor Lisa on this, but I don't think any woman would actually be, would have a problem with listening to her husband if the husband's willing to die for her. If the husband's willing to lay everything down for her, I don't think, the wife has a problem, Obviously, if it's not someone that is, seeking after Christ, then of course. But I'm saying that a lot of times, like you mentioned, again, I'm not experienced in this area, so I don't really have that. But I think for me, it's really good to learn this now. So with that said, what would you say was one of the greatest struggles that you had to kind of work through, and how did you overcome it, if it's not extremely personal or anything?
Yeah, well, it's tough to not be extremely personal. I had
if we haven't been personal enough on this podcast.
I had to call a friend on this one, and so I reached out to Lisa. I said, babe, could you tell me what are the things that, because it's obviously she's known me for all these years and seen me grow, and I didn't want to just come up with something on my own. And so I asked her, and for a husband, I think affection and learning to communicate and non-sexual touch.
Yeah.
So in other words, you're not just communicating affection and love and those types of things only when you want something out of it.
Yeah.
But all the time, because it's about this relationship with one another. It's about, so I think that's something that was learning how to do that. You know, the sexualization, the predatory aspect of our culture is such that I think, you know, women having to face catcalls and, you know, guys like, you know, whistling and always these derogatory sexual terms and stuff. I think for a lot of them, they're coming into marriage already expecting that, you know, that, and so that can be that carryover into marriage. And so learning how to relate to them in a pure, non-sexual way like that. But another one would be learning to hug the porcupine.
Could you expand on that?
Yeah. This is a term that Lisa coined. Okay.
By the way, if you're a girl and you're watching this, you gotta meet Pastor Lisa. She's amazing. Like, you know, everyone in our church loves her.
Yeah. So it is when she is, you know, that time of the month, or just going through something that's, you know, the way women and men are wired so differently. And men are emotional. We just show it in different ways. We usually go quiet, and she's
and just ignore things.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And or try and shut them down or something like that. But if we can learn to understand how a woman is wired, which is a lifelong endeavor. Because she's a mystery. She's the most perfect creation. She was the pinnacle of creation, right? Yeah. So she's more perfect, more intelligent, all that kind of stuff, you know. But it's learning to, when she's going through that, she said, you know what? I don't need you to fix me. I don't need you to counsel me. I need you to hear me. And then if you could just come up and just give me a hug, you know, I just hold me. And that's why she talks about when she's really prickly and she's hard to, you know, it's difficult for me to love her. If I can break through that and choose to love, I think that's when we demonstrate the greatest level of love, is when the last thing I feel like doing is loving her or communicating that to her or demonstrating that to her. So anyway, learn to hug the porcupine. And can I say as well that the practice for that as a single person is learning to do that with your mom and with your sisters. Yeah. Because it's the closest people to us that are the most difficult oftentimes. They hurt us the deepest and the most because they're so close. They know us better than anybody else. So they know what buttons to push and everything. So learning to love, make the choice of love with sisters and moms, that's the greatest practice. And we work with our kids all the time on those kind of things with one another. Yeah,
because that's exactly what I was going to say. I think that's just for any relationship. I think a lot of times we look at love as a transaction, right? Like, if you love me, I'll love you back. But I think what Christ has done for us, he says, you love because I loved you first, you know? And I think people that we think that don't deserve to be loved in that moment, this is where we have to say we were loved by Christ, so therefore we have to extend it, you know. And I've seen that so many times where, you know, a lot of us, we like to sort of, if they don't love us, then we just walk away. But I think in those moments, they need us to stick around the most. I remember this one particular moment where we were at a restaurant, and the server that was serving us, she was extremely like rude, and you know, everyone's just like, well, just don't tip her. But I noticed that she was like pregnant, you know, and I just kind of like, one of the biggest tips that I ever gave was that time when everyone felt like she didn't deserve anything. And I put that on a napkin saying like, hey, God bless you and your kid, you know. And I remember we kind of got held at the door, and she came to me and she was just crying. And she was like, thank you so much. Wow. You know, and I just kind of understood the power of loving someone when everyone thinks they don't deserve to be loved, you know, or you know, you to tip someone when you felt like you didn't get a good service. Right. I think this is a Christ-like, you know, behavior when we say, hey, regardless how you act, that's not going to change who I am. That's not going to change how I act. I'm gonna take a step and actually love you even more now. And that's so beautiful how how you said about your wife. So a few more questions I have for you, and since we led there, what does it mean to actually love sacrificially? What did you have to die to, is what I'm not trying to ask. In your marriage, obviously to your own freedom, right? Like you don't get to do anything you want to do. You have to kind of counsel with your wife about like your time and where do you spend it. But what else would you say that, it meant that love is sacrificial for you?
That's a great question. I think one of the biggest things I remember my pastor, who I grew up in, he said this. He said that when he touched the doorknob, he played this game with himself. That now he is starting his most important job. That he's worked all day long. He's tired. He's been doing all the different stuff, but he's leaving that behind, and he is now husband and father. And so, Lisa, I was asking her, similar things, and what would you say, how would she answer? And she, I really, especially when the kids were younger, tried to come home. I did the bedtime routine, so I'm getting them prepared for bed. So oftentimes she would be, cleaning up after dinner and stuff. So I'm getting them ready for bed, doing stories, and falling asleep halfway through the stories, but just having a lot of fun taking over because she's been with them all day long. So giving her a break. I hear about dudes who they come home and their wives sit down with my wife and they say he just sits on his phone. He expects to be, dinner to be ready, clothes to be, washed and cleaned and put away, and the house looking, crazy good. And he just chills out and expects to just be served. And so, oftentimes for the, trying to do the dishes, what Lisa says, there's nothing sexier than when you're doing the dishes and you're spending times awesome, with the kids. When you're helping around the house, when we're a team. That thing about submission and headship and all that, we're a team. And so when you do that together, when she feels like you've got her back, we had life group at our house last night, a bunch of people over, and every week it's a big deal to try and get the house ready to go. And she was saying, thank you so much. I just getting the bed made and getting the table ready to go and doing some of those things that make a difference, and then start rocking the dishes and getting the kids going. And so those are some of the things that if we can say, listen, rather than my most important job, I didn't make covenant with my job with AT&T or Microsoft or whoever it is. I made covenant with this woman. This is the woman I'm going to spend the rest of my life with. So I'm going to honor that marriage. I'm going to take care of my responsibility with my kids. And you know what? I can sleep when I go to bed. But right now it's time to where the real work begins.
With that said, I think I see a lot of ministers. You're a minister, you're a pastor. As far as I know, you've been a pastor for a very long time.
Do I look that old?
No, I don't think so. You're a cool pastor, though. I mean, our youth ministry loved you. I mean, I remember South Campus, you went and preached at South Campus, and some of the guys came up like, dude, what's that dude's name? Like the tall guy? And I'm like, you mean Pastor Eric? He's like, yeah, bro, that was awesome. I love the guy. I'm like, you don't remember the name, but like, he was awesome.
Just a cool bro.
But with that said, though, like, it seems that a lot of times ministers, they're so infatuated with their ministry and how to do things for God, then the process, their whole family gets lost. They have a son that he's not spending time with, or a daughter. And I think the question that I have for you is, how do you manage that? How do you manage being everyone's father in church? Because technically that's what we do a lot of times as pastors. We try to take care of people's emotional needs. So on one hand, it's like everyone is kind of asking you for your attention, but then not forsaking that, hey, your first and foremost attention needs to be given to your kids and your wife. Obviously Jesus, but like, I'm talking about like from a human perspective, like how do you manage between a church that has so many needs and then still fulfilling the needs of your sons, daughters, and your wife?
Really easy answer.
Yeah.
Super difficult to walk it out. And the easy answer is that all our married life, Lisa and I have tried attempted, and this has been more on me than it has on her because I've been the one kind of out, doing stuff. But I remember my parents said, you can never minister beyond your covenant. Mm-hmm. So, if my relationship with Lisa, which has to be number one in my life, obviously with the Lord, but if my relationship with Lisa is not number one and prioritized, and that has been a really challenge, because it's like I'm a chaplain as well. I serve as a chaplain for Key County Sheriff's Department, and one of the things they talk about is the personality of a first responder. And a first responder, pastors, policemen, firefighters, when the house is burning down, they're running in, right? Yeah. Pastors the same way. We try and help everyone. Our heart is that, you were telling me about, some tragedy within the context of the youth ministry. You feel responsible for people's lives, but that can't be the way that it is. And I can't father everyone. I can't help everyone, and I'm certainly not their Messiah. But I have been called to serve Lisa, to raise and disciple my children, and that's the most important. That has to be. Now, having said that, I haven't always practiced that. I've failed a lot. But Lisa and I being on the same team together, what we've tried to do is evaluate all the time along the way. How are we doing? And that's a hard answer to hear sometimes, because sometimes you're failing miserably at all things, and that's really, really tough. But she helps me so much with keeping things in priority and realizing, it talks about, we talk about this on a regular basis, just the amount of time that I spend in message prep. Yeah. I can spend hours and hours. There's never a message I've ever preached that was finished. Yeah. There's always 10, 20 more hours I could have spent on it. And she's like, Eric, nobody wants to hear a message that you've spent neglecting your family over. Yeah. I'm like, it always makes me want to cry right now. I'm serious. But it's so true. And so how do we discipline our time, manage the things that we need to do, and keep it all in perspective? It's a juggling thing. I don't think it's a balance thing. Honestly, somebody told me one time, they said, what? It's not balancing this and this. It's the fullness of all these things.
Yeah. Because when I look at a lot of fathers, especially in our youth ministry, is they look at youth ministry as, hey, come here, fix my kid. It's like, no, you as a father have the primary role in discipling your own son and daughter. And the last question I have before, I always ask people this: how do you practically live in light of eternity? I know that there's so many things you could say, but your personal devotion, what does that look like? I mean, studying the Bible, what do you do practically every day that makes eternity a reality? Not just something that, hey, someday.
I love what I think Russell, I heard him say this one time. He said one of the most valuable things you could do is go to funerals.
That's so good.
And it's because it's that time where you're faced with your mortality. Yes, we are immortal. We're all going to live on, whether with God or without Him. Yeah. But keeping those things in perspective helps us. It frames all of life. So that, I think, church, because hopefully we're preaching messages that are causing us and provoking us to really consider the most important things to prioritize. But I think it's the death of both my father and mother and my father-in-law that have brought me to that place of keeping things in perspective, loving more, loving deeper with my family, prioritizing time, all the things. It's like, I don't have time to waste. Yeah. I do waste time, but we don't have time to waste, and we've got to value the things that God values.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I want to take a moment and thank you so much for being on this podcast. I'm looking forward to having you back. Hopefully, Pastor Lisa, and for you guys who have been still watching this, it's been an hour, 2 parts. But I hope that this inspires you to become a better man, to become a better father, to become a better minister, and to live in light of eternity. And with that said, God bless you. Take care, and bye.
Cheers.